Whereas this is the overall story is very objective, meaning from an audience perspective, we're seeing that world objectively. We're looking at it, we're seeing how it works, what doesn't work, but how the whole world functions, but at a very dispassionate perspective. The main character perspective is very personal. You know, here's what it's like to have personal issues in this context. The relationship through line is where you find the passion. This is the heart line. If the overall story is the headline, the relationship is the heart line. And again, it could be any kind of relationship. It could be a romantic relationship. It could be familial. It could be teacher-student, guardian, guarded, whatever. But this is where you're going to have a very subjective view, and it's going to be very passionate. Which, of course, if you look at these two relationships, the romantic relationship and the supervisor, patient, or the protector, protected, or innocent and protector type of relation, those are very passionate, very lots of emotion in those relationships. That's also a really big clue that that's probably going to be in this through line. And typically you will have one relationship that goes, each of these go the entire length of the story. However, what you can have happen, and this is what we'll see if this is what's going on in this story or not, is that you can have handoff. In other words, you can have different players, but they're still playing the same game. They have two different kinds of relationships, but they're still about the same kind of stuff, the same thematics, the same issues, the same nature, the same problems that are being explored. And if it's not, then we may have something else. But frequently what you'll do is you'll see that there will be that one key relationship between that main character and the influence character that's part of that entirety. So any questions about those four threads? And ideally, every full narrative should have all four threads. When you don't, you end up with gaps. You know, if you don't have a relationship through line, you lose the heart. You lose the passion in the story. If you don't have an influence character, you don't have the challenge that forces the main character to deal with their stuff. So if you don't have that, why would a main character deal with their personal issues unless there's some external influence or force making them deal with it? Because they really don't want to be dealing with it. You know, it's not comfortable to have to go through that growth process. All right. So you see Grace is our main character. And we have a number of, we call these dynamic questions. And there's sort of two different contexts. The first set of four are about the main character. So we're looking at that personal thread, not the big picture, but just Grace and her dealing with her daddy issues. The issue of change versus steadfast. Main character resolved. The question is the character along the same path at the end of the story, or have they fundamentally shifted their worldview? Have they stayed the course, or have they grown into a position where they actually can now go down a different path than the one that they were at the beginning of the story? Any thoughts? This is about Grace. That's the main character. And then the follow-up is, how do we know that from the story? Yes.
I mean, really, dealing with her issues. I think it's really a challenge for like I believe she's steadfast.
Well, let's say, yeah, again, we're not talking about the growth. We're talking about whether she says.
I believe she's steadfast because she knows the approach she has to take. So I think that she makes it.
She knows it. How do you know that she knows it? How do we know that she knows it?
Because she believes it for everyone else. You know, she believes that that's the way to, is to sit down and talk.
Right.
And that's how
But she doesn't practice that.
But that doesn't mean knowing that it's good for someone else is not, and she knows that at the end as well, fine, but that's not where her issues are. Her issues are with her, not with other people.
Well, I think part of the point of the story is that she's really good with dealing with other people's problems. But I think her arc, I think the intended arc, is that she needs to learn how to deal with her own problems. And on that front, I think she does make a transition.
And how do we know this?
She goes to the therapist.
And
You see her on the fourth session and says, do you want to talk about this?
right. That's the thing that tells us she's now on a different path. Because she's gone to therapists. She's done all that stuff. She's been therapist, blah, 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 blah. She knows intellectually, but she can't talk about it. Even when her boyfriend, her fiance, you know, pressures her. And this is one argument for why he's not truly an influence character. Because now he's part of that process, clearly. I think he does part of the process, but he does not make her come to the realization of what she needs to do. Because he has not lived through what she has. And what you'll find typically with the nature of the influence character is that they will have, there's something similar about them and something different. And if you're talking about a story where there's a changed main character, which we're looking like we are, then sometime in the past, a path was chosen and that character decided to go along that path. And for whatever reason, it's no longer working for them. But over time, they've built up blinders so they can't see where they came from. It's a blind spot. So you can tell them things, but they won't hear it, they won't see it. They cannot just, oh, you're right, I just have to start talking about it. You know, that's not how it works. You can tell it to them until she's blue in the face, but she won't see that. The nature of what a story is about is tearing down those blinders. And the reason the main character is even bothering is because the influence character is putting pressure on the main character to have to try different approaches. Because they have a similar path, but they've chosen that alternative. So if there were two choices at the beginning and there was choice A and choice B, and the main character went with choice A, the influence character represents choice B, the path not taken. That's why they have that effect. Because all the way back to the seed of the problem, there was always this other way that could have possibly solved the problem. And that's why they have an influence or an impact or an obstacle to the main characters trying to hide from it, where other characters don't. So that's kind of that reason why they have that special effect on the main character that no other character does. Whether it's a group of players or an individual, it doesn't matter. It's that perspective, that alternative way of seeing the world or of approaching the problem. And that's what that influence character represents. So we see that in the fact that whenever you have choices in Dramatica, you never are picking one and getting rid of the other. Every story has every choice. The question is, how do you align them? That's where meaning comes from. So if I say my main character is a change character, well, steadfast character is going to show up in the influence character. So what that would imply is, if Grace is a change character, then Jaden would be a steadfast character. And Mason, if he's along the same thing, would also be a steadfast character. Just to be careful, all of the characters up here, in the objective world, they're all steadfast because they're not dealing with personal issues. They're just showing how to approach a problem. So they're always going to be protagonist is always going to pursue. It's what they root. That's that. So that's why you understand the context of what part of the story you're looking at makes a big difference as to whether or not it's even available for those types of choices. So we see, in fact, I mean, or how do we see Jaden be steadfast?
So is it that she will open up, but then she later grows to open up even more to more people? She opens up to great.
Well, but for her, remember, for her, she's always known what her father has been doing. There's never been denial of it. She doesn't necessarily be open with it, but personally, she's always known what her father has done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and accepted that he's just this a-hole that will behave this certain way. Now, she gets to a point where she's not going to tolerate it anymore, but that doesn't change her. That's just like, okay, fine, I'll just go in a group home or whatever. But she did exactly the same thing she's always done, knowing exactly she was going to get.
Sense of great because of the knowledge. She sent her mother prison because of it. So
No, but she's still afraid.
She says, I never thought about it. She tells that story. She says, I never thought about it.
That was the root of her choice. Her choice was to ignore it all, to hide it all. And when this young girl comes in, who has all the same conditions that she was at about exactly the same age, it starts setting these things off. With the, you don't want me to show you mine? Another thing you'll get with an influence character is invariably there will be a scene that says, you and I are just alike. And then the other one was like, no, we're nothing alike. Because the point is obviously they're not exactly the same, but they have a similar tie to whatever the origin of the problem is. And that conversation, if we have time afterward, I can show you a really fun short version of a montage that is just from all over the place. It has those different kinds of scenes where you and I just alike. You'd be surprised how often it's showed up. I just saw a TV show where in one episode because it had multiple stories, 2 scenes like that. And my business partner just saw it on Supergirl. There was an episode where you do the same thing. You and I are just alike.
Writing tip: never use the words "you and I are just alike." All right, couch it in other words. But
it's really important that you inform your audience that, because it's the key to that relationship. They are alike, and they are also different, and that is really important that the audience understand this relationship, because it's a very important relationship, and that's a key to understanding the nature of that relationship. So you remember the scene? I think there were 2 of them in this one that had the "you and I are just alike."
Well, the one with her and the stuff, whatever that inflatable dog was, when they're in the room.
But think of it more on the personal side.
No, I understand. Yeah. I mean,
Well, they talked about the cutting. That's
The
what she
cutting.
says, the cutting.
The cutting was the real big one, because
Yeah.
the cutting was related both to their fathers.
yeah.
And that was the one that sealed it. That okay, here are 2 women at different points in their lives who are dealing with exactly the same stimulus and responding to it along similar paths, but one is at a completely different end of the tail.
Moving past those girls, I thought they looked similar. to
Right.
each other,
I think that was again to try to trigger Grace seeing
But
herself.
there are multiple scenes in there where there's sort of a simpatico relationship happening. Like the baseball bat scene at the very end where they beat up the car.
But before that, they talked about
Yeah.
look at every time.
Yeah, exactly. And then the drawing scene on the bed that Molly mentioned.
The very first one was when both were laughing at Mason for gesturing to the music.
Right.
Well,
Well, I think that's when that's when the relationship, you start to see, okay, here's the relationship, it's beginning.
We both think Mason is cool.
Right. But I think the thing that's tied to the horror in the past, or in Jaden's case, her present, is in fact, the cutting and the reaction, the response to the abusive father. And of course, you see that in Grace projecting what the father has done to Jaden based on her own personal experience of what her father did to her, which is why she was standing in his room with a baseball bat to make sure that they didn't go to that next level. Or maybe she did. At that point, she didn't know if it had or had not, because the conversation before had stopped.
Well, because she entered the house and it was a wreck. I couldn't exactly read what was going on, but here the house was kind of a wreck when she walked in.
She knocked
over all the. She went into the garage, and that's where she knocked over the equipment.
Okay.
Yeah. So, main character, resolve, change. All right. The next question we're going to skip.
And that's within context of her journey, right?
Yes, the
It's
main
where she
characters,
goes and where she ends.
Yes, it's just looking at the ends. We'll talk about the path there. That's where the arc is. That's what this main character growth, but we'll talk about that later.
It's also not just about the arc, it's about a specific thing.
Right.
It's about, is she going to talk about it or not?
Yeah.
It's not a general, like, does she seem different at the beginning and seem different at the end? It usually can be pegged to one.
Yeah, it's an action that sort of defines, is a metaphor for all of the other things in the subtext.
Right. It'll be very specific. Main character approach, doer or beer. So this is going to be a choice of how the main character, how Grace, chooses to deal with personal problems. Does she prefer to take action, to change the environment around her to conform to her? Or does she prefer to change herself? It's sort of do internal work as opposed to external work and conform to the environment. These are not active and passive. Hamlet is a beer. He finds out his uncle has murdered his father. The ghost of his father says, "Avenge me." He goes, "Okay, how am I going to go about that? I know. I'll pretend I'm crazy. I will change my behavior in an effort to resolve this problem." Now, he's very assertive, and he's so good at it, it drives his girlfriend crazy, and she kills herself. So it can have the desired effect. Unfortunately, that is not the right person. It was a tragedy. So how do we see that with Grace? Does she seem to be a doer? Is somebody who prefers to take action to resolve personal issues, or a beer, someone who prefers to internalize them to resolve them? Now, try to keep it away from this part of the story as much as you can. The overall story. Try to keep it away from that. Think of personal moments. What does she do when she's frustrated or angry? Right. She gets on her bicycle.
Who's this?
Yes, she does. She does that. Because we're physical and mental beings, you have to be real careful about things that are. Cutting yourself is a physical act, but it's really close to. It's close to. The difference would be if you drank. That's essentially you're changing your mental state, as opposed to cutting yourself, which doesn't change your mental state. It changes your physical state, which then hopefully forces your mental state to kind of come into balance, which is why she cut herself. But riding the bicycle is the way she blew off steam. She takes a bat. The first thing she says, I'm going to solve this problem. She grabs the bat. She breaks the lamp. Those are all where she has personally gotten to that point where she's about to explode. Her preferred method is as a doer. Now, the story might require her to deliberate, but from a personal point of view, she is a doer. So that's her preference. Neither one is better or worse. It's just whatever it is in the story. In Star Wars, Luke is a doer. I mean, first movie made, 1977. You know, Princess Leia is going to be killed. Let's go rescue her. You know, R2-D2 runs off. Let's go rescue him. You know, he's not really even skilled enough. He gets caught and all that stuff. But he doesn't even think about trying to go, oh, well, you know, this sort of, that's not even a question. So for him, he's a major doer.
You have another example of a beer?
Sure. Have you seen Unforgiven?
Yeah.
So here you have William Money, who in the past was a super doer, and then he got married, and his wife told him, made him swear off doing, and so now he's a pig farmer, and he's confronted with a room full of men who want to, who are challenging him and calling him, all sorts of nasty things, and he's like, okay, well, that may be it, but that's not who I am, and he gets the crap beaten out of him, and does he get on his horse and go, no? It's like, okay, I'll just suck it up, and I'll just deal with it. That's what he's using internal energy to resolve his personal issues. Ultimately, though, because of the nature of the story, that doesn't work. The story requires him to do stuff, and he transforms into major doer. He's in a very similar scene. Everybody else has guns in that one too, and he has one too, and he kills everybody. Like, okay. And he doesn't give it a thought. It's like, you should have done that. Well, he shouldn't have decorated his, saloon with my friend. So it's like he's completely transformed from a beer to a doer. So that's an example of a beer, really strong beer.
And so here she transforms from being a doer to a beer. Right?
Yes.
Is that typical that there's that transformation? You start one.
Yes, because what happens is that the influence character represents the alternative approach. And frequently, if you're a doer, they represent the beer. Look at Obi-Wan is a perfect example of a beer. He's saying, let the Force come through you, and I'm going to act as a role model, be like me kind of thing, as opposed to Luke is like, let's do, right? So you typically see that relationship in a story.
You seen Room, right?
Yeah.
You talked about that. I Brie Larson, I think you could make a strong argument that her character in Room is a beer. It's very much a beer character.
Okay.
Whereas the kid is very much a doer.
Yeah.
So if you look at, since the argument's kind of wobbly in that movie, I'm not sure exactly what the transition is, but at least in terms of how they set up, I think you'll see that the be or doer dynamic between the mom and the son in that movie.
All right, we're going to get into a little tricky space here. Actually, I'm going to come back to this one. Story driver. Since we just talked about doer and beer, that's what the main character does. We're going to change context now. Now we're looking at the big picture. So the story driver, the question is, do actions drive decisions, or do decisions drive actions? So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, it makes a big difference. If you start with a chicken and end with an egg, that's a story of procreation. Start with an egg and end with a chicken, it's a story of maturation. Same pieces, but the order makes a difference. So every story will have both actions and decisions. It's just what seems to be the driving force. Typically, you'll be able to identify at least 5 major events that are connected to the driver. The inciting event, the thing that starts the story off, that if that didn't happen, you have no story. The closing event, the thing that wraps it up, and ultimately, every act turn is going to be tied to the same kind of driver. So the action, or decision. If you think of it, we just had Super Bowl Sunday, and if you look at the offensive team, the guys who have the ball, I'm not a football player, so I always define it for those who are like me, who know those things. Would you describe them as being action or decision driven, and why? But what are the new people? These guys know.
Oh, they would be decision
Because?
because they decide where the ball's going to go and how.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So they huddle, they make a decision, then they act.
I know football.
Great. Now, if you're on the other side of the line of, if you're on the other line of the line of scrimmage, it's flipped. Because it doesn't matter what you decide, you have to wait until they act. And then you can decide to counter it or time out or switch players or whatever. But the idea is that you're going to see it everywhere. This question has to do with, okay, with regards to which seems to be driving the story forward. Do actions drive decisions, or decisions drive actions? So in this story, what do we see?
I feel like it's decisions driving action.
Okay.
Like in the beginning, somebody makes a decision to bring that new girl there, right?
Sure. Usually you want to make sure you see the decision. One way of thinking of it is that decisions are made or actions happen.
Well, I think the thing that spins it off, I don't know, for me, for her story, is the pregnancy. Because everything's a sense of normalcy in the moment that she finds out that she's pregnant. Or maybe that's an underlying thing, but once it's revealed to us, that sort of spirals her.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that's why I said we're shifting context.
Okay.
Now we're in the big picture. So we're dealing with the troubled kids at the institution. That's why context is hugely important in this. That's why I'll mention it over and over.
Well, I'm just saying there's like that moment where the main dude decides to let her go with her dad, and that becomes a whole fight with Grace, and then she comes into his office and wants to dispute his decision to let her go. So this as an example of a decision in the home.
So you see the aftermath. You don't have to see the decision dramatized on screen. I think that's what the if it's a decision story, then we'll see the decision play out. So we would see the decision break down. Oh, as opposed to that decision's already been made, and she may already be it.
Right. When we see now, one thing to say, just because I put them all here doesn't mean they are equal emphasis in the story. It's really important to understand that because you might have way more main character scenes than you might have influence character or relationship or a lot of relationship and no overall story, a lot of overall story and not much relationship. So each one is going to tend to be, depending on the film, Hamlet, it's called Hamlet for a good reason and because we spend an awful lot of time with Hamlet. So his main character through line is a big part of that play. We see big picture thread stuff. We see very little influence character, who's the ghost primarily, the one who's saying, he's the one who sends him out as the sort of at the beginning, but he's the one who's trying to keep Hamlet in check because Hamlet wants to go after his mom, and he goes, "Nope, you cannot go after your mother." He's constantly like, "Keep on track, keep on track." So, but there's very few instances where he actually comes in, but he's there, and he has that presence is always there. So in this,
Yeah, if we're talking about all the trouble kids overall, you got the Sandy tries to run away right in the beginning, one of them swears he gets a medical job, one of them gets another with the bat. Those are all actions.
okay, which are the ones that seem to change the course of events?
I don't have one at the beginning, but one that's a pivotal one is when she goes to protect Jaden and she goes to the father's house. You don't see her deciding to do it, she just gets in a bike and goes there and gets back. So that's definitely action. Pivotal moment.
Okay,
I think Jaden running away is a big one. I think Jaden, along those lines, I think the action is Jaden is at her father's house because in that, I think
the father takes Jaden away.
The father takes Jaden away.
Suddenly the story has changed. We've gone a completely new direction. That's the kind of think of it as an act break. Where do you see the act breaks? And then what seemed to trigger the act breaks? Because that's what that's what these are. These trigger your act breaks, and they're going to be essentially. Dramatica always sees it as 4-act, not 5, not 3, because the 2A and 2B is kind of silly. I mean, it's really just 1, 2, 3, 4. Because the nature of what's in the first half of the middle is different than the nature of what's being explored in the second half, which is why calling it all 2 is really erroneous, because they're not exploring the same things. So we also have the introduction of the new girl. That's what starts this. That's what ties all 4 threads together permanently and starts the story. Sort of almost like puts the last bit of the catalyst in that means it's going to go to wherever it's going to end up. That is from that point on. Boom.
How late in the movie is it? That's late.
It's pretty late.
Yeah.
It's pretty late, and you have the reason is you're exploring a lot of different stuff. Because you don't have, even though they technically all happen simultaneously. Practically speaking, however, when you are telling the story, you can start, I'm going to start a little with my main character, which is where we start out the movie, and we find out she's pregnant and all that stuff. That's just her stuff. Well, the very first part is we have a little bookend at the beginning and end, just so we can kind of get a sense that did this things work out or not, and is it good or bad, and it's sort of epilogue, prologue type of things, but they're part of the story. So you have a little bit of that and a little bit here, but you then, you don't even get to these 3 lines until, a little bit with the boyfriendy thing, and we'll see again whether or not, how closely that fits or not. But you sort of weave this together, and so it doesn't have to be evenly done. So the idea is at some point, these are all going to sync up, and the only thing you can possibly do is move to the next step. Ultimately, the new girl going back voluntarily, permanently to the home is the thing that wraps it up. Then you have the cleanup of it, which is, okay, she talks to essentially what's going to be the law or whoever, the authorities, and so that's going to get taken care of. And then you have the main character, little segment, she's in therapy. Oh, okay, so we now know she's on the road to recovery. All those things, we see those nice little tidbits finishing off each of those pieces, staggering the little ends, temporarily. So I think, it does seem that the things that completely change the course of events do seem to be tied to activities. The first one, again, I think with the escape, was really just as a way to give a bookend, so we know big picture are things at the troubled kids institution. Does that sound okay? Timing? All right. And remember, actions lead to decisions. So that's what we're really saying in this case. By choosing action, it says actions drive decisions.
But the last one said Jamie decides to go back to it. It's a decision, but it's an action, isn't it?
Well, no, it's really they destroy the car,
Oh.
and she decides to go back. But she's basically destroying the car was instead of just taking a bet to her father.
Yeah. I think the action is she talks to the law. That's what she's never done.
Well, that pretty much ends it.
I think that's the thing that ends it.
So it reveals it. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll take that. And again, it's from an audience point of view, it's always going to be inexact because you don't know what the author is thinking. You're just saying, well, we're trying to think of what we saw and how to make sense of it.
So I think one good point that was made earlier is that most of the decisions aren't happening.
No,
We don't really see them. Like even that moment where she decides to go and talk to law enforcement, we just jump cut to that.
But we do see a lot of deliberation after the fact.
Yeah.
So which is why you see they're driving those decisions or driving those deliberations. But, you know, you always see that as the aftermath of how do you deal with it. Next one is story limit, time lock or option lock. Something's going to bring this to a crisis. You're either going to run out of time or you're going to run out of options. A time lock is literally a deadline or a fixed amount of time. You've got noon, get this done by noon. Or you've got 48 hours. 48 hours, pay or play. Whatever the goal is, you're going to fight for it and win or fight for it and lose, but the final climax crisis is going to happen whether you like it or not. An option lock is there are only a certain number of conditions, your limited number of conditions, and once you've run out of those options, again, same thing. It's time to pay or play. Which means you have kind of a sense of what the goal is. Anybody have and the other way of looking at an option lock is also if you have some stories not about options but about space that needs to be explored. You have a certain amount of territory that needs to be covered. You know, a New York to LA. Well, you know, there's the amount of space that's left, and once you get to LA, you got to deal with it, right? And that's how those stories have any kind of sense of, oh, this is going to be over when X. So there is a lack of a time lock for sure. There's no deadline. There's no fixed amount of time. In fact, kind of weird. You're not even sure exactly how much time has elapsed during certain things. You think, oh, it's been 2 weeks. Oh, it's been how long? But what kind of options do we see as being there only be a limited number of options available before something's going to happen?
Well, there is a little bit of a time lock because they do speak specifically about the girl, about Jaden, and her limitations on how long she's at short-term club. So, like, they talk about how her dad's coming to get her in 2 weeks.
Right, but he doesn't. See, this is the reason that it's not a matter of time.
Yeah.
It's the log part that's really important.
Okay.
In other words, what is going to force it to a crisis? And if you can add more time, it's not a time lock. Or if you can add more options, it's not an option lock. It's literally so. Now, some stories are really explicit. Monkey's paw. You have 3 wishes. When you've used that last wish, you know basically the crisis. You've hit crisis point. You've either won or lost. Nanny McPhee. There are 5 lessons I must teach these children. You know, once the 5th lesson is done, story has essentially come to a crisis point. Sometimes, and very frequently, they're not nearly as explicit, but you can imply them. You can certainly sort of sense what they are. Star Wars is an option lock, sort of in 2 ways. One is that in the big picture, you can certainly see it in terms of the Empire is trying to find the rebels, and there are always a certain number of ways that they can find them. And you know, first they try doing all the places where they used to be, and then they try to coerce it out of the princess and blow up Alderaan, and then they try to, and then they finally find it, and they have to get the Death Star there. But once the Death Star is there, you have your big crisis moment, right? You've got the 2 forces are physically in proximity. In this, anybody have an idea what?
Well, 2 things I can think of is the father's getting out of jail in a certain amount of time.
Okay, that's main character, so that's a different context. That's what's going on with Grace. That's not what's going on in the big picture. This is the story limit, not Grace's limit.
You can say the same thing for abortion on Saturday. I was just going to say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Saturday came and went kind of. So we had a lot of time pass, and Saturday there was a lot more. It seemed like there's a lot more than.
I don't think so, no, because at the doctor's visit could have easily been the abortion clinic, or it could have been the ultrasound. You know how it's kind of. It could have been.
But if it was a timeline story, you'd have constant reinforcement of where we are in the timeline. you know, that's the nature of the time lock. Is that
But no, but more importantly, that's not part of the overall story. If everyone was concerned with Grace's baby, then that could have been part of it. But at that point, you'd really have to make everybody aware how much time before we make this decision about whether or not we keep the baby.
But the story's about people healing themselves, because you have people who are sort of caretakers who are there to protect these kids.
It's about kids healing themselves, kids finding protection and trying to be healed. But it's about the kids. It's not about the adults. The only adult that we're dealing with is the main character, but that's in the first.
She's still a kid, though. Her and Mason are both still kids. They're out of that system.
But that's not what the big picture is about. So the important reason I'm saying this is it'll become a little more evident when we start looking at what they're exploring, because they're going to be exploring completely different things. But right now, trust me but I'm asking the question as it regards to, and think of the characters by their function, not their names. So we're looking at, this really sort of starts when the new girl comes in, right? And ultimately it ends when the new girl stays permanently. So what are the steps that, and the problem with her staying is the sort of resolves it. The problem is that you've got a father abusing a child who is temporarily, for some wacky reason, just sort of shuttling her there during the week because he can't deal with it, and then supposedly bringing her home for weekends, which is weird. So there's only a certain number of ways to find out what's going on before she gets put back in there and permanently is out of the system and therefore cannot be saved, right? Is that kind of really what's going on there?
Yeah, so it's like, at first I was going to say the options are ways of treating the kids. It's like you see medicine, we let the kid have the dolls, we take the dolls away from the kid, we keep the door open and just go. But now you're talking, I feel like what it really is how do you draw Jaden's story out of her? It's you try to be that, you try to befriend her, you put her in the room with the Go-Go doll, you listen to her story, you go across her father at night, and those sort of things.
Right, and I think what it should have been is exactly the one you were talking about the different ways to treat kids, and treating this new girl is one of those things, because what you were just describing was really the relationship. Because it only involved the two of them. It was really just about the two of them and that growth. And that's where you have to be very careful. Again, that really sounded like that buddy thing going on, not the big picture. I think the big picture is how do you treat these kids and get them to heal. And that's why you have the whole thing with the little redhead and discovering, you've got the new guy. The whole point of having the new guy there is how do you sort of enter into that world and become helpful and be accepted. And that was sort of his role, is to show, rather than being a clueless, pardon my French, dick about what he says and thinking everything in the world is all about him. Well, how you feeling? Oh well, I feel. It's like, no, I wasn't talking about you. Here you've got someone who's just so self-absorbed in a world where you've got these children that are damaged goods by not their fault, but they're the ones that are suffering it. And you've got lots of different ways of approaching it. And ultimately, he's the one who's able to rescue this one kid from practical catatonia. And we see that ultimately works out because the bookend tells us that he was successful. So I think that's really what I think that's what that limit was really trying to do. How do you reach these kids, and how do you actually help them? And there's a lot of different stories in there, a lot of different people with what happened with Mason, not Mason, Marcus. There's another story, that's another part of it, but that's after the fact. is it looks like it's a failure story. You know, so he's got all these different things that happen. So it appears to be an option mark. I'd sure say it's an extremely soft option mark. I don't think there's really anything that's clearly defined. However, the way you can tell there is one or there isn't one, if you ever get the feeling of it's like, when is this going to be over? And you have no clue when it's going to be over, there's no limit. Or if you feel, oh, okay, it's over, and then it goes on, there's a limit, but they didn't honor it. There's some unspoken definition that they set up that you go through and then you ignore it. All right. The last two are fortunately the easy ones. The last two I'm going to hit here first. First one is story outcome, success or failure. So looking at the big picture, there's a goal. Is it achieved or not? Achieved. And how do we know?
I think mainly because our protagonist says that she's going to talk about the history, but we also see the girl talking to the police, opening up about that.
Okay, so the main character stuff, that's not going to be part of it. This is a big picture thing, so let's put that aside.
The young girl isn't with her father.
Okay. Anything
Marcus
else?
is okay. She's okay. Everybody seems okay. The kid runs out and then he turns around.
Right, so everybody who's supposed to be there wants to stay there. Because at the beginning, the first story we hear about is about the kid who runs away. And what happened to him? Well, 2 days later, he ran away again. And 2 days later, they found him dead behind the bushes. That's the failure story. So they really clearly defined, if this is going to be a failure story, here's what it's going to look like. And we ended up at the end was, same kid, redhead, runs out, exact same things, but he's not running away. He's teasing the helpers, and he's having a great time, and nobody is trying to escape. That's by definition success. That means people are there, they're getting help, but they're in the safe zone. Now the next one is story judgment, good or bad. Now this is more the emotional assessment, and closer to what you were talking about. Usually you can look to the main character for this. It's a little broader than that, but the main character is usually the best gauge. And the idea is there's an inequity. There's something out of balance. It's creating anxiety. Is it resolved? If it is, that's good. If it's not, it's bad. So at the end of this story, where do we see it?
Good.
Good, and because... What did you say?
Everybody,
Now this is going to be more about her.
she decides to talk about her.
And she's able to be okay with it. Because she could be really feeling crappy about it too. But it seems to be therapeutic in a positive way. And that means we basically have a happy ending. So the idea is that when you have a success good story, that's a happy ending. A failure bad story is a tragedy. But then you also have the bittersweet, the success bad and the failure good. Silence of the Lambs, they stop Buffalo Bill from killing the senator's daughter. Yes, success. But are the lambs still screaming? Yeah, they are. That's bad. So personally, it's not so good. Big picture, it works out fine. Rocky, does he win the competition? No, it's a failure. But does he able to get past all the personal stuff that he has? Yeah, he did. So it's a failure good story, a personal triumph, as opposed to a personal tragedy. Okay, so answering any indie question by itself has a certain meaning, but when they start to stack them, you start getting those harmonics, which when we're seeing it, that's what we're really registering. We're not registering the pieces, we're registering sort of the collective of all of those things. Just like when you eat a muffin, you have the collective of all those spices and all the ingredients as they interact with one another. That's what gives you that, this tastes great, or ooh, this tastes terrible. You know, whatever in between. Okay, so are we pretty good with that? No?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. No.
All
right. So now we're going to shift gears completely. And for you new people, it's going to be a little cover to follow. So for a moment, just briefly glance over at the wall here, and you'll see there's a very, very complicated chart there. And actually, here, you would take one and pass it along. Do you want one? Yeah. That is going to be a black and white version of that if you open it up. Did you want one, John? Yeah, and you can hand those out at your meeting.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of terms there, and I'm not going to worry. Don't worry about trying to define them right now. The easiest thing is to sort of use their general understanding of the term, but there's really a far more. They have much broader and narrower different definitions. So the most important one that we're looking at right now is you look at the big ones. I've written it up here, just looking at the large labels. And we call this a quad. This essentially is 4 squares. And the important thing to understand for what I'm going to be talking about is that there are relationships that we call dynamic pairs. They're the diagonals. And they are the things that are in a relationship that have the greatest potential for conflict. So your main character and influence character are going to be in a dynamic pair. The overall story and the relationship are going to be a dynamic pair because you have the dispassionate versus passionate, the I and the you, that personal and impersonal. So what we do now is we take these 4 perspectives and map them to the chart. And what that starts to do is it starts to give us a sense of not only what each of these perspectives are looking, where they're looking from and what they're about, but also how are they going to be explored. So, so for instance, in situation, the easiest way to think of this, you look at the top half, this is external, and the bottom half is internal. Now we were talking about doer and beer. So doers would be dealing with things that are external, and beers would be dealing with things in the internal. Then the diagonals have state, meaning status, something that's stuck, not moving. And then along the other diagonal, you have process. So you have an external state is a situation. So you have a problematic situation. An external process is an activity, something that's out of control that needs to be brought under control. An internal state is a fixed attitude, fixation, bias, prejudice, and then internal process is psychological problems or manipulation. Those are the areas in which we're going to try to find the best way to describe what's going on in the story in the context of each villain. So anybody want to take a stab at either the main character or the influence or the overall story? Which one of these domains seems to be the area that it seems to be focused in? Go ahead.
Grace is pregnant. I think that's her situation. And I think that that's driving her problem because she's suddenly going to have to face how she's got pregnant before and that she's going to have a child in the future, and the people she's taking care of now seem to be falling apart around her. So is she going to be good at being a mom? So I think you just described past and progress and future.
Yes,
Yeah,
that was not an accident.
Yeah.
So if you look on your charts, the upper left-hand quadrant, the next size down, he was describing those 4 large subsections, which are past, present, progress, and future, or how things are changing as a matter of progress. And so that's another way of looking to see where it is as you look what's inside it and say, do I see these things in the context of that? And so for her, it's a problem. She's in a state, and until she's accepted the state, in which case there's no more problem, or she's terminated the state, there's no more problem. But until then, she's in an external state that is creating conflict for her. And that's why looking at Grace and everything she's dealing with back to what you originally said, is all with regards to that. And she's got the history, the past that she's dealing with, all those things. Now,
So is this grid primarily related to the main character?
No. Because what we'll see is, so we'll put the main character here. All right. So because of making a choice that the main character is there, we already know then where the influence character is going to be. She's going to be down in the fixed attitude. Or he, too, might be him as well. Might be Mason or Jake. So this is going to be someone who's dealing with seeing the world by looking at, here's the way I see the world. This is the way it's got to be. Fuck you if you don't like it. And
5 minutes into her introduction to the story, Grace says, well, your attitude is a real problem. It's going to be good.
right, and it's a real problem for Grace. It's the one that's really challenging what Grace is about, because Grace is seeing herself, and she's looking at a young girl who's just like her, which then, again, calls into question, can she be a good mother because of how messed up she is? It's another consideration that her situation is challenging that wouldn't be there if this girl didn't pop into her life, which is why she finds out she's pregnant. Okay, let's schedule it. It's not like a non-issue for her at that point because she doesn't think about her past until Jaden shows up. And suddenly now that, oh man, I'm dealing with this stuff I thought I completely forgot about it, that I never have to deal with. And it just really rattles it. All right? Now, what we need to do is decide where the overall story is going to be. We see that everybody, these troubled kids in a group home facility, is it because they're troubled activities, things that external problems they're dealing with, or are we dealing with psychological problems that they're dealing with?
Well, I'm just joking. Marcus can't say that. But no, I would say more psychological.
Everybody, I mean, it is short of being a psych ward.
Yeah.
They're there because they're emotionally disturbed. They don't know how to behave. Behavioral things that are internal. So you see that our overall story then is here, which puts our relationship in activities, which is why you see the two of them doing all these physical things together, like kicking the crap out of that Bobo doll and drawing and batting the car. I mean, they're all these troubled. Pardon?
Running away.
Yeah, running away. Exactly. So I mean, that's why you see all that. Most of the activity seems to be focused on the two of them, whereas when we see the other kids, we're seeing, them manipulating one another. Much as I said, is trying to piss him off, and he the one he killed my fish, and so I'm going to kill myself, and I don't want to leave because I feel like I'm going to be lost. All sorts of things that the kids are dealing with, or removing of all the toys, but he's just like he becomes the redhead becomes a catatonic in response to it. So he's completely lost inside himself, his head. So you just see a lot of that. And you notice they didn't really spend a whole lot of time on what the effect of the meds was, but really focused just on the behavioral stuff. So that then indicates that we have, at least from what we've seen, it seems to fall into really nice, the pattern very nicely and consistently. What this allows us to do then is to be able to explore each of those threads within a very specific context to understand the nature of what it is that they're going to explore. And we're going to look at the film, recall what we've seen from the film, and see, in fact, do we see examples of that showing up in those parts of the story. And so the next thing we do, we have to move. If you look over on your chart, what you'll see is that in each of the domains, the largest, the broadest area we call the domain, or it's a class. Structurally, it's called class, but we call it the domain. So we have the 4 domains, and each one of them broken into 4 types, or what we call concerns. So in situation, we've got past, present, how things are going, and future. In activity, we have understanding, doing, gathering information, and obtaining. In fixed attitude, we have memories, contemplations, impulsive responses, and innermost desires. And then in manipulation, or psychology, which I prefer to call it, you've got developing a plan, playing a role, conceiving an idea, and changing one's nature. So what we want to do then is we want to try to find, what you'll see is over the course of the story, each one of those will be the focus of an act. And ideally, we'll probably end up seeing exactly how those things flow through. We can look and see if that's how the film followed that. But what we want to do now is to say, okay, in the overall story, we see everything's dealing with manipulation or psychological problems. Within that, where do we see trouble brewing up from? Is it from people playing roles? Is it from the nature of people trying to change one's nature, or being their nature changed, or coming up with an idea? Conceiving an idea is just sort of like getting it. Do you understand what's going on? Developing a plan is, okay, how are we going to work through something? In each of those, I'm not sure that I'm not sure which one that would be. For her, in situation, she seemed to be troubled more by her past, her present, her future, or how things are changing. That's probably the easier one probably for us to answer, because we spend a lot of time with Grace. Anybody have a suggestion for what they think that would be?
Past, right?
Well, she sure has an issue with the past, absolutely.
It seems like that's the major thing she needs to get over in order to resolve her angst.
Yeah.
I mean, she certainly the pregnancy has to do with the future, and she's uncertain about it. But it's about getting beyond the past.
But it's based on the past.
It's based on the past. Yeah.
She's not actually. She never says she's worried about it. She's never.
Right. I think she's more worried about, like, can she?
Well, because of the past, right? Is her past going to affect her ability to be a mother? Her damaged past, or in some ways, the past that she's pretty much blocked out and refuses to deal with. Right.
It's Grace and Mace. But when you were going with the through lines for the overall story, when you said conceptualizing, developing a plan, it seems to be what the subject matter is for the overall story is how do we work through this in each of these cases?
Or each
how do we work with Marcus,
right?
That's why. That's why you don't have two characters.
Yeah, Mason, Marcus.
How do you work through that? With the new guy, Nate, I think his name was. How in terms of him, how do you work through him getting acclimated to the environment? It all seems to be working it through and developing a plan.
In the redhead, it's like we're trying a new plan.
Right.
Take the dolls away. This is
Who came up with that idea? And
Exactly.
Right? And she when she, I think the scene with the guy named Jack, the man who's kind of the manager or whatever. I don't know. I think that's a sign. That's a very strong sign.
Well, I think it's playing a role. Meaning we have a function here. We are caretakers. That is as far as we can go. We cannot go. We're not therapists. If you're not a therapist, we have therapists. They do what they do. You do what you do. That's how this works. And when they step off the property, they're out of bounds. We cannot touch them. We cannot do anything. You know, so yeah, I think he's basically was laying down that rule.
Right.
So putting her in her place, saying, "You have a role here. That's it. You know, you're not her mother. You're not her sister. You're not her whatever. It's like this is it."
Right. But so I think all those signposts are hit. I mean, certainly changing one's nature is,
Right.
It's addressed at the end when we talk about Marcus changing his nature, and certainly, and again, it's like who came up with that stupid idea? But these therapists don't know what they're doing. So I think that just
Well, even in
confirms.
the beginning, when she says, when she's introducing the new guy, like, this is what you do. This is the role that you play.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, she gets told it, but then she also tells it to somebody else
Right.
in the beginning right up top.
And then if you look at the relationship, you look at if what we're seeing is if it's the past, then that would mean that we'd be really interesting. Okay,
No,
so
but she denies the past. She doesn't want to deal with the past for the whole movie. So it's not
Right.
about the past.
well, no. But you see, recovering the past can be it. Just like if you look at any of these, it can be the existence of it or the absence of it. So, for instance, we look at fixed attitude, memory. So it's remembering. It's also forgetting. And obtaining. Obtaining is not only gaining something but losing something. So all of those flavors are completely part of that territory, and you can explore both of them or all of them. It doesn't need to be one particular type. Culturally, we tend to be biased toward a certain interpretation of, for instance, obtaining. We always think of it as gaining. But whenever one thing is gained, it's lost from someplace else. So it always includes that other half. And you might want to be gaining it, or you might not want to be gaining it. You might want to lose something, or you might not want to lose it. It's its weight. You want to get rid of it. It's money. You might want to gain it. Get it.
Those things also aren't topics.
No, they're arenas.
They don't talk about the past, but the problems come from the past. So
It's not the subject matter. It's the frame of reference.
It's also her blind spot. I mean,
Right.
that's why it's the most potent, the most powerful concern in that group is because she is in denial of it and won't talk about it. So that's why it's so powerful.
So if you think of someone having here, look at the fourth row. So we have beginning, this is the beginning, this is the end, this is the middle, and then we've got two act turns, right? If you think about a change character, what each of these acts represents, this is where things start, and then something will change the nature in there. Essentially the chemistry changes and forces things to expand. For instance, the main character, they'll explore as much as they can, and then they have to change tactics. And that's what the act break is. Essentially, it's okay. You have those blinders. Boom! There goes one of them, and it's very painful to lose all these justifications that you built up. Moves on, the next one drops down. Moves on, the next one drops down. So by the end, the things that hid the original problem from the main character are now available to them. That doesn't mean they're going to choose, oh, now that I see that new path, I'm going to take the new path. But now I know at least what the choice was, which was, of course, in the backstory what the choice was originally, where it built it up. It's really about the process of tearing it down for a change character. The steadfast character is exactly the opposite. You start where they don't have any, something disrupts them, and then they have to keep on building blinders so that they can stop looking back and looking forward to, nope, I'm going to continue ahead. No, I'm going to stay the course. I'm going to stay the course. You get right up to the end, and you're going, crap, which way do I go? I've got huge amount of weight on both sides. I don't know which way is the right one, but I'm going to take that leap. I'm going to stay the course. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. You can never tell from within the system. Inside, you can never tell what's going to happen. So that's what these acts do, is they essentially tear down the blinders. So by the time you get to the end, that character can see what's the source of their problem. The last one would be over in understanding. In the relationship, it's sort of like, okay, misunderstanding, or trying to understand what's going on with this girl, because I'm afraid there's going to be a repeat of something that I know has happened, or maybe it's happening just like me, or not. I don't know. I can't,
I mean, most obvious thing is the arc of the relationship is gaining an understanding, mutual understanding.
Right.
So it's a positive. What do you call it? Constructive relationship.
Right. So I mean, that's the nature of what happens when you've got those. But when you choose one concern, you actually choose it for all four. It's based on position. So if we chose past as the thing that she's most concerned with over the entire length of the story, even though she'll explore how things are changing and how the future and all that other stuff, the one that's sort of where it seems to be always a problem, that means understanding will be in the relationship, memory, in fixed attitude for our influence character, and developing a plan in the overall story. That particular level, you pick one, you've got all four of them. They're all tied together that way.
In the same quadrant.
Yes, in the same quadrant. Right. Thoughts? Are we okay with that? Okay, let's move on, and we're going to now need to bring up the software. Pardon?
Oh, are you using that?
I'll just bring my other computer in.
No, you can do it. Just wait. Sure.
What?
I'll just set it up for you. You can do it.
Okay. So I still going to need to bring up the...
Oh, you can't do the projector from here.
No. I have the screen right here.
Got it.
You're not plugged into it, right? No.
Nope.
So let me just bring this back over so I can operate, and y'all... Right. Perfect. So now what we're going to do is look at the software, just because there's so many choices. Oh, great. Right there. And again, at any point, this is where it's going to get a little overwhelming for you who's like, if it isn't already, you'll start to get even more so. So I'm just going to make some of the choices we have made. We said she's a change character. We said she's a doer. We said it's an action driven now. We left with, so there's an option lock. Not a strong one. Success. Good. Overall story we said was manipulation, and we said our main character concern was the past. Now, what I didn't point out to you, and I'll point out to you after the fact, the story forms remaining, we now have 32 possible story forms to choose from out of 32,768 that we started with before I made those, I don't know, 7 choices or whatever it was. And instead of having these things where, say, any of 4, any of 16, those were any of 64. So we've narrowed some of the choices down. It makes it a lot easier to approach it. Now, I'm going to pull up a part of the program that basically looks like that chart because it's easier in this context just to sort of do a lot of little exploring, because as you see, each one of those, although they show the impact of a choice, they don't give you any context for it at all. So we're going to bring up what we call the theme browser. You see, it's kind of, and I will do some zooming in because the text is so tiny. So if we go over to our main character, all right, so there we are looking at the past, and you'll see the next level down, fate, destiny, prediction, interdiction. Those are the typically you'd think this is more the thematic level. So this is where you'd have commentary on on what's going on in Kate's life. What seems to be the things that
Grace's.
I'm sorry, Grace's life. Yes, that was a weird slip. Grace's life. And so of any of the four, do any of the four that are there speak to anyone? Fate, sort of the path that you're chosen. So if we go down here, we have, so fate is the future situation that will befall an individual versus destiny, which is the path that you must take. So rather than what's going to happen, it's the how you're going to get there. Prediction is a predetermination of a future, basically future state of affairs, versus interdiction is an effort to change a predetermined course. I know these are really abstract.
Prediction.
Okay, and why?
Because she's trying to assess where she's been and who she is as a person based on how she's going to be, one, as a mother, but also as a wife. But two is like how she's going to handle all the problems that she has beset before her for what her life's going to look like in the next 5 years. Like, what life is she building for herself? So I think, like, ultimately it's like, it's not just about her efficacy at the short-term 12, but also just her ability to be able to understand, like, who is she? Like, I think she's asking that question. Like, what is she capable of? What
Okay.
can she take on? So, yeah.
And what you find is that if we were looking at prediction as her, we call it thematic issue, then it's really going to be a thematic conflict between prediction and interdiction. So what you're destined for versus the effort to try to change that course. And I think I think that of the two, that speaks better to me, but I'm not.
The two dynamics.
Yeah, in terms of prediction and interdiction, sound like a good.
I like Destiny because I like projection and speculation.
I like aware and self-aware. That's where. But just
Well,
looking at the term by itself.
No, I was looking underneath the term, and be specifically for the same thing. I think.
So what they're saying is, rather than looking at the thematics itself, because you're going to have all four of those are going to be in her through line. They're going to be a real big focus of it. But by looking below that to say, okay, what's going to be the actual cause of her problem and its solution, plus the symptom, which would be the thing that if you asked her what she thinks her problem is, the one she would identify, and then her response to try to resolve that perceived problem.
But the story isn't about whether she's aware or self-aware of her problem. She knows what her problem is. It's about getting the boulder rolling. To me, I don't know. Sorry, you know what I mean? It's like it's just about her saying, "I'll talk." You
Yeah.
know, sorry.
That's
No.
inertia and change.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. I see.
Sorry.
No, it's good argument.
No. This is exactly the time to be
If
making
you
the
don't
arguments.
argue, you can't learn the system.
Great.
Right.
Like
Okay, great.
you have to argue, or
That's
you
good.
will.
That's good for me. That's great.
So, I saw that, and this could be me totally putting this on this, but what I saw was fear. Every time one of the kids hurt himself, I read that as she's concerned about her own, how she's going to be as a parent. She didn't prevent this, which I'm putting under speculation and projection, but I might be putting a lot of that on it.
But back away into her more personal moments, because that's the easier way to evaluate. How do you see those? You know, when her father called, when she gets, there's the call that says her father's going to get out and is going to be paroled. That is a pretty intense moment for her.
That struck me as, out of those 8, as inertia.
So it's going back that we're going to be back to the same old, and
Right.
can't escape that.
Right.
All right.
But it could also be aware, because it's aware of he's going to be back in her environment, which is what sets her off.
But what does she do every time something comes up? like another problem happens, she just sits on it. You know what I mean?
Or she refuses to talk.
She refuses to talk.
But she bicycles. So is that the opposite of inertia? Is it the physical manifestation of what she's not doing?
Well, there's also actuality and perception go in that group, and so one of them is the underlying problem. One is what appears to be the problem. So I'm trying to think of examples where actuality and perception are issues.
For her.
Mhm.
Those
Well, like the perception of what kind of mother she'll be and actually what kind of mother she'll be.
Or is it the perception that in her mind, or she's handling things by running away, but in actuality, she's not.
no, that's not how these two things work. If one of them is the problem, the diagonal one will actually resolve it. So that's the relationship. If you're looking at the problem, then the diagonal one will be the solution. And it can go either way. But and then the other pair, one of them will be the apparent problem and the apparent solution.
But her perception is that she can't be this other person.
Well, okay.
To herself, right? Or I don't know, am I arguing?
How do we know that? I mean,
Because she's constantly running away from Mason. And
but how is that a perception issue? That's the problem. See, perception very specifically is sort of how you perceive. This is the way things appear, but are not truly. So, and if you're saying, and you need to remember, is this the context of the problem or the solution, or what she thinks the problem is, as opposed to the real problem, the real source of her drive, or what she thinks the solution to her problem would be. So I think let's go to the big picture. Let's just look at the overall story for a second. So if we're looking at our overall story, now what's nice is in here you've got state of being, sense of self, situation, and circumstances. Thematically, those all sound really rich for these kids and where they find themselves.
Can you describe sense of self instead of being?
Sure. State of being is how you are right now. You know, are you upset? Are you catatonic? Are you happy? Are you, sense of self is what do you think about yourself? What's your evaluation of yourself? Do you have a positive evaluation of yourself? Do you have a negative evaluation of yourself? Do you have, a lack of any kind of sense of self at all, or a grandiose sense of self? So it's really about who you think you are as opposed to really the way you truly are. In Hamlet, that's where Hamlet is he's in state of being and sense of self, which is the to be or not to be. It's like, do I exist or do I not exist? And if I do, well, is that really what I see myself as being? Am I that kind of person? And if I go there, is it going to be terrible? Or, do I deserve that kind of thing? That's kind of where that whole soliloquy ends up in that particular area. But we look at our kids. So what seems to be the problem with these kids? What do we see, or with the entire facility, having this facility, because kids are trying to run away. Why are they trying to run away?
Well, I'm thinking of Marcus's rap song, and that's, to me, that's screams circumstances, because it's just a revelation of what the circumstances of his life are, and Jaden's little story about the octopus, to me is just screaming out, these are my circumstances. I've been betrayed. Whatever that story meant, it was some metaphorical to the circumstances of her life. I'm trying to think of other examples. Let's see, we don't really know. Let's see, Louise's, we don't really think much of his backstory. The redheaded kid.
Oh, I know what this. Okay, I know
but it's just, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. That's just what seems to really kind of resonate
I think there's
among
also
those four terms.
just to play off the dynamic opposite. They are in a situation. They are out of their house.
Mhm.
They are in this place. It has its own rules, and that's going to play off of their circumstances.
Mhm.
So that would be the counterpoint.
All right. I'm going to make a small argument based on what you were saying, very consistent with what you're saying. We look at go back to, and I'm going to suggest that the problem and solution for Grace is self-aware is the problem, and aware is the problem, and self-aware is the
Aware of the
solution.
problem because she's
Aware is the problem. Now, what awareness is being aware of others, kind of almost to the absence of being aware of yourself. And that's exactly what she has done. She's essentially set up, I'm going to go down this path where this thing that has happened to me, it is no longer me. I'm going to be looking out. I'm going to be looking at everybody around me. And as long as I do that, I will be able to not have to deal with whatever I dealt with. And for her life, it was a way to cope. And look at the job that she did. So the problem also truly becomes the source of motivation and drive for that character. It becomes a problem when it no longer works, where it's creating conflict because the influence character comes in and sort of starts to point out at the symptom, and the symptom and so if we said, for instance, I'll just say this is a main character problem. So you'll notice what it's happened. It says, okay, speculation is the symptom and projection is the response. So if you asked Grace, what's troubling you? She's going to say, well, there's just too much speculation about what is going on, about me or about my life, or I'm speculating as what might, is this going to work in my relationship with my fiance or not, or is this baby can I be a good parent? So the response is, well, okay, how can you look at this and make sense of the world? I'll project out who I am and where that logically will go. And for her, usually that's an okay place because she sees herself around children and stuff and it's all right. Or she says, I can get rid of this baby because, I know I'm probably not, it's not a good situation for me right now, until you have the introduction of the influence character where the self-aware problem starts to be sort of tickled. She can't see self-aware. And she can't even see awareness as her motivation, but she can sense that other is there. And it's sort of like, holy crap, what is this? And ultimately, what does it require her to do? She has to go back in touch with who that girl was that said, I'm shutting this all out, which is where we find her at the very end. She is finally looking inside and saying, here's what's going on. Now, we see from the outside, it's easy to assume that, oh, she's dwelling on that and stuff. No, she's constantly trying to batten down the hatches so she cannot see it by looking away, looking at others. And unfortunately, she keeps on looking at the girl who looks an awful lot like she did in a situation that's an awful lot like her. And of course, what's the big tripping point? Daddy's coming home. And holy crap, Daddy just came home for Jaden. Well, we know project that out. Where's that gonna go? Not a good place. So she's gonna go and stop it. And that's what drives her over to that house, is based on the fact that she's taken her life and projected it forward and going, crap, I'm gonna take care, I couldn't take care of it for me, I'm gonna take care of it for her. Right? And so we can understand that step, but really that's not going to heal her. All that will do is get her to the point where now oh crap, I have a choice here now. Fortunately she didn't make the wrong, she was stopped by her influence character. But now she has the opportunity to heal. And fortunately, the story says, yes, she's going to step up and begin that very slow process by becoming more self-aware. And that will resolve the inequity that would not allow her to have a child or have a life or have a family. And we see that is in fact what happened. She's able to move forward with the rest of her life just by beginning to have that self-awareness. Now, if we look at the overall story and let's see what its effect there, what we see is that the problem in here is going to be aware. So what's driving everyone is looking out for others. I mean, this is the nature of the facility. That's what's motivating everyone. And unfortunately, it can also create a lot of conflict. But if you see what seems to be everybody focusing on, which is what the symptom is, because everybody, if you ask anybody what the problem is, look how unfair these children have been treated. Look how this huge inequity, this terrible inequity, these terrible things have happened to these children.
Kids.
Underprivileged kids.
Exactly.
Exactly. And what's the response? We're going to create an environment where they're fairly treated. There's balance. It's
Everybody gets a birthday cupcake.
right.
Yeah.
And that will allow the healing to begin. And point of fact, ultimately though, it requires that there are certain kinds of problems that cannot be solved just by treating everything objectively through awareness. And you do have to look inward and say, okay,
Well,
self-aware, there are problems that do require self-reflection, and we do need to get the system to be aware aware of it, which is her big argument to her boss.
right.
You know, he's saying, no, we can't go there.
Well, no, he's even saying, I've been doing this for longer than you've been alive. I'm completely aware of, what goes on. But we have to deal with, go by the book or whatever his argument was.
Well, his argument is I can't take a child from someone's biological father based on a hunch.
Right.
Yep.
And that's true, but if you suddenly become more self-aware about what you can and cannot do, then you might be able to resolve the problems. Like, here's what's going on in this girl can start to discuss, say, here's what's my problem is, by revealing those things that she couldn't. And the kid was allowed to heal by having this new guy bring this in and say and bring that little tidbit of his sister back, and he's then able to sort of move on because of the way it was taken away. So let's just look, because of the time, let's just look and see what the ramifications of this are.
Still one thing to pick.
Yeah, we do. What do we have?
And I was going to say the prediction is not out.
It is. Of
what's that?
course.
What?
Problem-solving style. Yeah,
I
I'm
was
sure.
going to say prediction is not off the table yet, though, because.
Okay, so we are. Well, we can. Well, let's talk about problem-solving style. Okay, I left that off. What this is, main
So the
character.
start is set in stone based
Right.
on the other choices that are made.
Right, and what that means is the main character's growth said she needs to step up to the plate. She's holding back. The choices are stop or start. A stop is a chip on the shoulder kind of a person who basically is always stepping in, and they really need to learn to hold back in order for them to change. So that's where the growth happens. For her, she's stepped out of the picture, and she needs to emotionally step up to the plate so that she can change. Because if she doesn't step in and risk herself personally, then nothing's going to happen. And she does, and it gets her to that point where she can finally go, she can see, oh, there are the choices. It's revealed to me after I bashed in this car. And the girl is sort of like, okay, so now what are you going to choose to do, kind of a thing. It's like, all right. I know where I have to go personally, and I'll go there. So this last one, the main character problem-solving style, This was originally called mental sex, male or female. One of the ideas in this is that the way in which your main character solves problems is going to affect how they go about solving it, either linearly, looking at cause and effect, which is a typically male approach, or holistically, which is an approximation term, meaning looking to relationships and finding balance to try to resolve things. It's not so much solve things, but resolve them. Or to understand how things are based on the relationships. And a good example of a linear thinker, Jake Giddy's in Chinatown. He's a detective. He follows clues. When you have a linear thinker, if there's a piece missing, they won't make that jump because they have to put all of the pieces together before they can get to the conclusion. And you find him he can't understand who's behind all of this. It just doesn't make any sense until that one little bit of information. I hope this isn't a spoiler for anyone, where there's the bad for glass comment by the gardener at Evelyn Mulray's house. One of the goals is to find out how what's his name? Mulray. Evelyn's husband died.
Yeah.
He was in a freshwater runoff with salt water in his lungs. Well, it turns out at her house there is a saltwater pond, and when he finally understands, oh, he must have been drowned here and then taken down and trucked into the freshwater runoff. That's how he had the salt water in his lungs. So once he did that, he's able to put all the clues together. Unfortunately, if he looked to the relationship between all the parties, he would have realized that her father was the one who's actually pulling all the strings, and he owned everybody in town. And by Jake Giddy's informing the police about what's going to happen, everything was going to go south. But he's a linear thinker, and he couldn't see that. A holistic thinker will look to how everything is connected, like Obi-Wan, who's a major holistic thinker. It's like, think of his description of the Force. It runs everything, through everything. Well, and Luke says, well, does it control you, or do you control it? No. Well, it partially you control it, and it controls you. It's it's this one huge web of interconnections, which over Luke's head, he doesn't quite get that, but it doesn't matter. That's probably that scene where they're two talking. There's a good illustration of what a linear and a holistic thinker think like. So for Grace, do we see her as a male mental sex character or a linear thinker, or do we see her as a female mental sex character or a holistic thinker, and why? And then I'll tell you the cheat way to find that out after the fact. But this is great. We actually have two women in the audience here, so this is terrific. No. It's really good.
Serious. What do you?
I think she's a bit linear.
Okay, and how?
Well, she just feels like this is my past, therefore my future can't be good. Or,
A linear thinks cause and effect. Steps.
I
If
just
I-
heard, but she's also she's sort of a healer in and of herself. She's sort of using holistic things to heal the people that she's guarding over. So,
I mean, her expectations with the kids and when she's dealing with those kids is not that this small thing I'm doing is going to heal this person. I feel like it's always like, she's like, just the situation right now, like, it's okay. Like, you're going to be fine. It's okay. I don't know if that's just what we're watching is just technique or if that speaks to the character. It's definitely had weight in the movie. So it definitely had value. I mean, I'm just spitballing.
The two I got is for linear, Euchorus, it's like a step down. It's like rule driven. The other linear is Marcus's fish died. Well, it must be that kid who had prior history with him.
But is that the way she sees it? Is that her technique? Not you certainly see lots of rules which are very linear, and the environment is very linear. How does she approach those rules? How does she solve? How does she
She
think?
lets one go.
But I mean, is she goes and she asks, you know, the not Marcus, but the kid that supposedly
Luis.
Luis, you know, and she wakes him up and such, and she asks him, sure, but is that how she makes the decision?
I guess she assesses him based on how she trusts his reaction. She's assessing his reaction.
But on the back end of it, she lets it go because she realizes that that's not really what's at issue.
Okay.
I see her as holistic, and the one that I'm holding on to is she gets mad at her boss, so she breaks his lamp as a way to get back. It doesn't solve any problems. It just gets energy out of her. It sort of sends a message to him, and it diffuses energy, and then she moves on.
And he has a relationship with the lamp,
Yeah.
and she was
He was
striking at him through his relationship with the lamp.
Right.
That she understood because he.
It's the first thing he says.
He more than talked about it. He's like, you know, touch it.
It's
you know,
cool.
yeah, and now,
Is that linear or is that holistic?
okay, that's more holistic because it's not. How's that going to solve her problem? It's really there's no linear. If I do this, it will solve a problem. In fact, it may in fact create greater problems. We don't know. We never played that out.
But it's affecting the balance between her and you know. See, it's hard for us to understand because
Now, here's the easy clue. All right, this is the
She's a woman.
no. That's not it. Okay, for women, audience members, this is a non-issue. It can be either way, not a problem. Men cannot empathize with holistic thinkers. So if you felt like you couldn't get inside her head, that's what it feels like when you have a holistic main character. If you felt like I'm looking at her and I see her going through all this pain, I can sympathize with this pain she's going on, but I cannot share it because I just don't understand it. That's what it feels like to have a holistic main character for men. That's why I said that's the cheap way, and I really recommend against that. But
the hard part is trying to come up with examples and understand them. Like I said, you know, she's for better or for worse, she's changing the environment. She's changing the relationship between her and her boss by destroying the lamp.
Yeah, but
and that's
do or be her. That's why she
well,
breaks it.
well,
that's the doer thing.
doer. Okay, yeah.
Well, she also up top, I guess, explains the rules to the new guy and then says, like, you know, there's gray area there. You got to start on the side of being too hard, and then you can always loosen up. And here are the rules, but you work inside the rules.
She also breaks the rules like right away,
Yeah.
a couple of times. But not only that, I mean, I think it's just like generally like her approach to the problems in the group, the approach with the problems with a kid are never seem to be about outcome, never seem to be about some penultimate goal.
And same way with her boyfriend.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but he was a total linear thinker. And the way she was behaving, it's like, oh, you did this, boom, boom, boom. Now she's behaving this way. I don't have a clue what you're doing. I don't know. There's no cause and effect here. I what is going on? And I think that for me, I can only speak for me, I could guess what's going on because I've seen other things that he hasn't, but I didn't know exactly what was going on either. I was hoping we would, explore further and we get, a lot of it would revealed, which it does, but I couldn't tell you exactly what was going on through her head at that moment. She gets on the bike. I don't know where she's going. I'm not surprised when she gets there, but I couldn't have told you that that's where she was headed.
Yeah.
In retrospect, sure, I guess it makes a lot of sense because of a relationship, et cetera. But
It's my second time watching this movie, and it made way more sense to me.
well, I'm sure because
Yeah.
you can see the relationship of where she is at that moment to where she's going to be and understand how that balances her life.
Yeah.
First time through, we don't have that, and that's the thing is it's about balance. So my guess is she's probably a holistic thinker that was the intent? Is the writer was a man, right?
The writer director.
Yeah. Okay. So and now here's what you do. So before we choose it, let's just make a couple of. We have a couple of choices. We have 2 choices in a whole bunch of different places. So the main character unique ability. We have 2.
See, that's where prediction comes up.
Yeah, that's where it comes up, and
She's
Just a
bad
little
at
quick,
that.
Yeah.
Because you asked if the writer was a man. The original, this was based on a short film that he made, and in the short, the main character was a man, and it was based on his own experiences.
okay.
working in the facility.
Really?
Okay. All right, let's look at the critical flaw. I'm going to go with critical flaw. So, a main character will have a unique ability that makes them uniquely suited to help the big picture. This is where you have a crossover. So, Grace, in her personal through line, as a main character, she'll have an aspect of her character that will allow things to work out successfully in the big picture. So, end success. She'll also have a critical flaw, which is the thing that's going to undermine that unique ability. So there are 2 choices here for critical flaw. We have truth or suspicion, meaning that one of these 2 things would be the thing that would undermine her ability for this to be end in success. So it's something that's not going to be excessive in this film because that does, in fact, end in success. So any thoughts as to which that might be?
She's suspicious of herself, isn't she?
Well, it could be, okay, it could be she is suspicious, she is suspected, or it could be attributed to her or an attribute of her. Likewise with truth, it could be a truth about her, or she could be truthful. So it's like sort of any flavor. And if none of those ring true or have one no more than the other, then we can go to the nice thing is you go answer questions you feel you do know.
I'm curious what the benchmark choices are.
So for her, we're looking at her situation with concerns about the past. Do we see, we evaluate how this is developing in terms of how things are changing or her present condition?
I think it's her present condition.
Yeah, that's fine. My intuition is, it's not strong. That's my guess. How about in the overall story, where we're looking at sort of the psychological troubles and planning? Do we see that the benchmark in terms of roles that are being played, or sort of getting an idea about something?
Getting an idea, that's stronger.
Yeah, sort of like getting it,
Yeah.
So with that in mind, let's select holistic. And okay, so this one says, so this is saying playing a role. So if we made it linear, which based on the author, I would have said linear. Knowing the author, I would have said it would be linear. Catalyst is sense of self, right? Catalyst, sense of self, an inhibitor of instinct. I don't know about that. Or unique
Or lack
ability.
of instincts. Or lack of good instincts.
I don't know. I'm not.
A destiny works for unique ability because she predicts what's going to happen to Jaden if her dad picks her up. And that drives her to the house, which then precipitates the end of the movie. And the critical flaw might be, isn't she almost fired when she tells the truth to the guy?
Wait, now you said predicts. It's like, I think wasn't the other choice prediction? So that was holistic.
The benchmark for the overall story is in some ways playing a role. The kids are playing. The caregivers are playing a role for those kids.
So in the effort to try to sort of get these kids to behave and not want to be running away, and do we see them by it's obviously at the beginning they certainly aren't playing by the rules. They're not staying in line.
But they're saying that their job, in the very beginning, it's defined as their job is to create a safe place for these kids.
How is that playing a role? Playing a role is essentially, the real definition of it is sort of like adopting a sort of momentary lifestyle or a condition. It's essentially being a certain way as opposed to becoming something. So it's a do you know Spanish?
No.
Okay, that's easy to start.
But like the kids
There
are
are
doing
concepts
the
that
same
are
thing.
really, really strong in English.
Yeah.
So playing a role is essentially you temporarily adopting a lifestyle. You're saying, okay, I'm going to.
Are those kids temporarily adopting last?
Sure, and the question is, at the beginning, are they doing it not so well, and by the end, they are doing it better, or vice versa? If that's
Definitely.
Yeah,
so
there's
if that-
definitely outbursts.
so, that is what a benchmark indicates. There's a benchmark that tells you are things moving, progressing,
Got it.
or regressing.
Got it.
And we're getting toward the closer to the end because we see the kids are behaving better as opposed to the beginning. They're running away and doing all that stuff. So that would be consistent
The new
with.
employee, his benchmark, he's getting better as an
Playing
employee
his role.
there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true, and he's not being sort of out.
Well, he lets the girl spit on him and he doesn't react. In the beginning, he would have.
Like he did cleanse his face.
Yeah, but that's after she was dealt with.
Yeah.
When he gave the kid the toy, the doll,
Yeah.
even though he's not supposed to do that type of thing, that's a complete change for him. He's better suited to play that role of understanding the environment.
And also in the relationship they do a lot more together. In the beginning, Jaden really rejects her, and then they
Oh,
do-
right.
they do more stuff
More and more
together.
together. Right. There's
Even the there's a nice intermediate one, which is you walk a safe distance from me. So they're taking the walk together, but not really together. And then at the end, they're beating up a car together.
right.
And that's really closely knit.
Okay. So I don't know that we have a lot of time to go over all of the different ins and outs of this. You've got a couple other things to look at. So we have the issue for the influence character, issue of falsehood. I think that reads really well. In other words, she's really thematically, she's all about sort of falsehoods versus truth, and she's putting out. She's more, I guess, susceptible to the falsehoods. That her father has told her, etc. Although she's calling him on his baloney, and by the end, she pretty much just said, I'm calling it like it is.
Well, her story about Squid and the shark.
Right, it's all about these falsehoods that are
Falsehood of
being
friendship.
told. Yeah,
And it's also
friends are built. Friendships are created that way based on this false relationship. Oh, I'm just a little hungry now. I'm going to eat you all up, but I'm just going to do a little bit at a time.
yeah.
So the idea is that what you would do with a lot more time is you go through and you see, does this seem to hold together in total to reflect what we see in the film? Or if you're doing it on your own work, is this what I see in my story? Or if you're creating something, can I use this as a really broad map to know where to explore things in the story? And if we look at the signposts, or actually I'll just look at the plot progression. So these are the 4 threads, but looking at each of those types, those 4 types, act by act, so you see, starts off with how things are changing for the main character, the future, the present, and ultimately dealing with the past. I think that
really spells it out.
Yeah. Let's see, we have our conceiving an idea, playing a role, changing one's nature, and developing a plan. I'd have to look at the scenes specifically. But the way you, again, since these are sort of act wide, it gives you a sense of the direction so the context within which to explore everything that's going on within a particular act, within a particular thread. And when you write, well, depending on the kind of writing you are, the value of this is if you are a completely organic writer, you don't even look at this until you've written. It's because if a blank page or a blank screen is infinite possibilities, don't even think of something like Dramatica because you want to just create. But then you need to corral and sift. This is a great tool to help you do that. If you're like me and a blank screen or a white piece of paper is like a wall, I need something to push against. It's sort of like, trying to be out in space and there's nothing to push against and you can't go anywhere. Then this can be a really good way to get something started because at least it begins to give you some edges and then you can stop at any point and write and then go back and forth. In either case, it's always a back and forth issue. Whenever you put your editor's hat on, that's when this tool is really helpful. People do that some people plan it all out up front and some people don't plan it all and some do dabble a little this and that. And the other part of it is understand this is never be a slave to it. It's sort of like designed to be, here's the perfect way to construct a perfect kind of story. Stories are not like that. They're far more organic and they're messy and you don't have enough time to explore everything, especially if you're doing a script. So it's always about picking and choosing and exploring what you want. And if you leave out a big chunk, this will probably be able to point out, oh, there's this huge chunk that's missing. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I forgot about that. Because that's usually what the audience is going to pick up on. Or this isn't developing properly. That's how you can test it. Especially I find probably one of the most valuable things, other than just thinking about the domains and the perspective, the through lines. If you got those 4 domains, the 4 big ones, and the idea of the 4 threads, that alone will save you a tremendous amount of effort and in terms of making sure you don't leave any of the big stuff out. The dynamic questions, when taken together, you can have any combination of them. So you don't need software for that. You can just answer any of the questions in any combination, and each one is unique. When you start getting into the rest of the story form, then it starts to narrow down pretty quickly, and there's a lot of vocabulary. But they start to get very specific. And I think to me, always the most exciting is looking at the problem, solution, symptom, response. Because, when you are trying to understand how someone can exist with a problem and behave and react to a problem and not really deal with it, that explains it. The symptom is if you walk up to a person and ask them what their problem is, they will never describe to you what their motivation is, what their true problem is. They will always describe the symptom. Because that's, from their subjective view, that's the only thing they can see. People talk about the tsunami and then respond, how do you deal with the tsunami? Well, you have the warning system, you live far away from the coast and all those kinds of things. Well, that's not the real problem. The problem is the earthquake that causes the tsunami. But people, maybe sometimes you can't even deal with the problem. You can't solve the problem. But understand that the tsunami itself isn't the problem. The tsunami is because you could treat that tsunami all you want, and as long as you have earthquakes, you're going to have tsunamis. So it's important to understand that that's how people deal with the problem. And so you won't see the problem and solution pop up very often early in the story. Because unless someone is being real smart ass and they pop up and they say, hey, you know what your problem is? Blah, 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 blah. And they're just like, no, it's not my problem. Yeah. And because I can't see it. Any questions? And then there are reports and stuff that can spit all this out in many different flavors. If you have about 9 minutes or so, I can show you, if you'd like, I can show you the you and I are just alike. Montage. It's a lot of fun. If you don't have time, that's fine, but I'll play it. I think it's well worth watching. Let's see.
Thank you. We're gonna.
Oh, absolutely.
This is great. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And I want to do this.
Michael, drop me a line if you want.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
There we go. So, I'm gonna need to turn on this. Oh, we're on. Make sure it's okay, good.
Remix.
You and I were the same. No. There's a difference, my man. You have faith.
That guy, Tommy.
I wanted to quit play as much as you did.
Not as much.
But you don't kill for it.
Who says?
You and I are very much alike. Archaeology is our religion.
How did you not respond to you the way I have?
I saw myself in you. Because we're the same.
We are not the same, Lawrence. Now don't go spreading that around.
If you would just take a step back from all of this, you'd see that you and I, we're really not so very different. We're both loners, we're both isolated, we're both really untrusting. We're both looking for the same clarity. You've come to mean a great deal to me.
Yeah, well, you mean shit to me.
You can't understand.
Your family wasn't killed by a maniac.
Yes, they were. Are you ready to plunge the entire quadrant into war to satisfy your own personal demons?
It amazes me how little you know yourself.
I'm incapable of such an act.
You are me!
The same noble Picard blood runs through our veins. Had you lived my life, you'd be doing exactly as I am. So look in the mirror. See yourself.
Let's be honest. It's all been a grand adventure, but it couldn't possibly last. We're too alike, you and I.
Are we so different, you and I? You take life when you have to, as I do.
Dad, I come to believe that I got it in me to be somebody in this world. And it's not because I'm so different from you either. It's because I'm the same.
You and I are so much alike.
Nothing alike. Nothing.
Look at yourself. Look at this. Look at what you are now. You walked away from the light just like me.
Look, Peter, I know what it's like. Really, I mean, for all our blustering back and forth, we're really pretty much the same guy. We're all just like you. No, I'm sorry, but I'm not like you. I just said the N-word by mistake to win money. I made a mistake too. I was trying to be funny.
Right, give me another day. 2 days, I'm close. I can pull that fat cat down. I can bring him right off this hill. Oh, boy. Man, you're just like the rest of us. Ain't you?
There's an ancient saying I've learned to trust. Never judge a book by its cover. We're not all that different, Paul Atreides. You and me.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Tweety, I sometimes feel like you're the only person in the whole world who really gets me.
Yeah. Sometimes I look at you and I see my own reflection. It's revolting. And attractive.
Will.
You and I, Louis, we're the same. We both want the same thing.
No, she said you were cool, but you know,
No, I don't know.
sort of how you are. It's fine, relax.
What do you mean? What's that?
Sort of like me.
Sort of like you? I hope to God you didn't tell Nikki that.
Why?
Because it's just not right lumping you and I together. It's
We're actually kind of the same, you and I. You're not dead. Well, no, apart from that. And you're a boy. Oh, well, yes, that too. You're not like me at all.
I think that you think I'm a bankrupt. Truth is that I'm just like you.
like me. No, because you're a murderer.
That I am, and worse, much worse. But I do have ethics, rules to which I adhere.
You're garbage who kills for money. Don't talk like one of them. You're not. Even if you'd like to be. To them, you're just a freak. Like me.
Oh man, look at my life. I'm a lot like you. Oh man, look at my life. I'm a lot like you. Hey!
We're the same.
No, we are not the same.
You knew where you had it.
Anything I need, yeah. So you go to 2 AA meeting, I need. Okay. Hey, look, don't do it. Jesus Christ, don't worry about me, okay? You just worry about yourself. Don't worry about me.
We're the same.
No, we're not the
Here
same.
we
We
are.
are not the same.
Why does he keep looking at me like this?
Not the fucking same.
What was that from?
Apex?
No, the video.
Oh, you and I are the same. This is just the video that we put together.
Oh, you put it.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't have Frost Nixon in there.
Oh, I have. That's the long one.
Okay.
No, I have one that's like 20 minutes long and it's got all sorts of things in it.
Frost Nixon, the only scene that was fictionalized in that movie was the "You and I Are Just Alike" scene.
Yep.
The author of the play, who also wrote the screenplay, knew he needed that scene. He needed that connection between those two characters in that way, and so he fictionalized that scene. But everything else is fact.
Is that on YouTube?
No, there are obvious copyright issues, which is why we.
That means we're done, guys.
Well, I think it's funny that you knew that that's what that was.
This is a long running joke.
Okay, got it.
Still love. Another visual example of the "You and I Are Just Alike." Have you seen Katy Perry's Roar video?
Mm-hmm.
There's the whole thing with the lion. There's a little story. It's not a complete story, but there's a little story in that video. And the lion is kind of the impact character. And and she's trying to draw the lion in. She's trying to tame him, basically. She draws him into this like closed area, and she goes roar, and she spits out the image of the tiger, trying to establish you and I are equals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to let you be superior to me. We are equals. So it's a very nice visual. You and I are just alike.
Now that you've seen this, you will see it everywhere, and you'll go, why didn't I see this before? And the reason you didn't see it before is because it's such a key part of the story that it's not just circumstantial. It's actually really an important element of the story element that when it's there, it's quite satisfying, and you go, okay, I know exactly what's going on in this scene. And if you watch for them enough, you can start going, oh, this is the you and I are alike scene. And, you know, several beats before it even comes. You just know exactly, here's where it's happening. I can tell this is what's going on in the story. And this is about the time they would, oh, yeah. And then every once in a while, they'll do it with the wrong characters. Every once in a while, they'll do it with the protagonist and an antagonist, which makes absolutely no sense. I'm for the goal. I'm against the goal. We're both the same. It's like,
well, the antagonists sometimes will do that just to try to psych out the protagonist. It's
right,
a psych job.
But that's what the Batman Joker thing is, isn't it?
no, not at all. Because it's, if you didn't listen to what he said, it's like they are protagonist and antagonist, yes.
Yeah.
But that conversation is not
about
that. The process is that, you know, we're both freaks.
Yeah.
You know, they think you're a freak like me.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah, that the problem is they're going to spit you out because they don't like you as much as they don't like me because we're both different.
Which in the end is what happens in that.
Well, sure, it's a transformation movie. It's called The Dark Knight. It's about him taking over the Joker's role. You know, he's a change character. In that one, he becomes the dark side as opposed to the light side.
When I'm sometimes when I'm consulting with a client, I tell them about that. It's like there needs to be a connection between your two principal characters, your main and impact character, and you need to find that you and I are just alike moment, that conversation between them. And sometimes they get very resistant to it because they're afraid it'll be cliche. But the point is not cliche. It's how you convey it that turns out. If you actually say you and I are just alike, you end up with Wolverine.
Or
you know, yeah, and it does sound cliche, but you need to couch it in more original dialogue.
But that K-Pax scene was
yeah,
great.
isn't that wonderful? Yeah,
it's so smart.
And the thing is, the image itself is that you and I are just alike, but the scene is that, okay, they're both on, it's a two-way mirror, so you see them on both sides of it, but that also reflects the difference between one is on the inside and one is on the outside, but the one who has the emotional problems is the one that's on the outside, and the one who's not, but everybody thinks does, is on the inside. So, you know, because the psychologist, the therapist is the one who really has the personal issues, and K-Pax, which everybody thinks is crazy, who may or may not be.
He's self-aware.
Well, we don't know enough. They leave enough out that they always the objective reality is in question. We don't know, but in that world, he's seen to be the crazy one. So you know, so there is that part where they are the same in that underlying part, but one is on the outside and one's on the inside, literally. Yeah.
You've talked about main characters and influence characters. Does Dramatica even deal with the concept of the antagonist?
Sure, the antagonist and all of the other characters are part of that big picture. Yeah, in fact, what you'll have is that there are, if you want to think of, in Dramatica, it starts with the concept of archetypes, but as opposed to Jungian archetypes or other kinds of archetypes, even the hero's journey, which is just sort of a version of the Jungian archetypes, they're not based on thematic or even cultural aspects. They are structural, they're functional, they're problem solving. So you'll have, in fact, four dynamic pairs of archetypes that make up the potentially all of the points of view that need to be explored. Typically, most stories don't have archetypes. They have an element of it that will be an archetype, but then they'll split it up amongst lots of different characters, so they feel a lot more complex and not so simplistic. So you can have your protagonist, and they're balanced by the antagonist. Then you have your sidekick, and not in a particular order. Sidekick, and a skeptic. Reason and emotion.
So did we not talk about this tonight because this film maybe doesn't have all of those?
No, because they aren't tied to the meaning of the story.
Right.
They're tied to the logistics of the exploration of the story. Just like you'd say you have setting and you have time period and things like that. These are going to be part of the argument that is being made. The story form is the argument. When you explore it, you have characters, plot, theme, and genre you use to explore it, and the characters in the overall story, or we call the objective story through line, it's another, that was originally what we called. You have objective characters, which are the characters that explore that. These are in an archetypal form, you have these, and the last two are guardian.
This is a very handy exercise when you are creating,
Mm-hmm.
or when you're analyzing your own material, so so you can make sure that all your characters have a particular voice. But we usually don't get to this because it takes another couple of hours to go through this exercise.
Yeah.
Really clever. Who would you say the antagonist was?
I was going to ask that question.
The dad?
It's her father. It's her father.
Her father, yeah.
Well,
I think it's the boss.
Or the system. But I think it's good. It's
So you walk
see,
into
but
tomorrow.
these are complex characters.
Well, see, I don't think you have.
They're
think
not.
you see. All right, this is a perfect example. So, some of these are very familiar to you. This one is one that you probably have. The contagonist is one that we label because there was no label for it. Star Wars. First of all, what is the protagonist? Protagonist is the one that pursues and is pursue and consider. Pursue, consider. So in other words, externally they say, go for it. Internally they say, keep your eye on the ball. Don't lose sight of the goal. Consider it. Keep it in mind. The antagonist is avoid or prevent. It's one of those wonderful little English language problems. And then reconsider. So there's a goal, try to prevent it from happening or keep or avoid it being accomplished. And are you sure you want to do this? Maybe you should try something else. So that's that.
So you're right, it's the boss.
Right. That's where
Well,
see
there's one
you
part.
get the reconsider part, but you don't get the prevent part
Oh, prevent
necessarily.
stuff
You get a
and-
little bit of it,
Yeah.
but that's part of it. Now, then sidekick is support and faith. The faithful supporter.
Mason.
And then you have the skeptic is the is oppose and disbelief.
Which I think kind of describes Marcus.
I think maybe that's the boss.
It could be a combination.
And the thing is, you can combine them in pretty much any combination you want. You generally don't want to put two sides of a dynamic pair. You can't really try to pursue and prevent in the same context. In a different context, you can. So you can have more than one player more than one character in a player. Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So they can, but you have to make sure that the audience knows which is talking, which is the other one. Reason is control and logic. Emotion is uncontrolled and feeling. It's been a while since I've done this. Guardian is help and conscience. And the contagonist is hinder and temptation. So if you're looking at Star Wars, Luke is the protagonist. The Empire is the antagonist. Grand Moff Tarkin being the sort of the head of that. And the first scene where we have Darth Vader acting on behalf of the Empire, he's there. But he separates himself apart from them very shortly after that. Sidekick, those are the robots, R2-D2, C-3PO combined. They are the sidekicks. Skeptic, Han Solo. Reason, Leia, the Ice Princess. Emotion, Chewbacca. Guardian, Obi-Wan. And then the contagonist, this is Darth Vader.
Yeah.
He not only represents hinder, he basically makes it difficult for everyone, but he also represents the temptation. In the first movie, he doesn't tempt, but he shows what happens when you succumb to the temptation of the dark side. So he represents temptation. As I say, it can be an attribute of or attributed to them. All right? In the second film, he actually is actively tempting. So they take the same element, but then turn it into a more proactive element as opposed to being a passive attribute.
And then Yoda becomes the guardian.
Right, and Yoda becomes a guardian.
Is there a reason why the bifurcation, does that matter at all? Or is that just how you're
Well,
laying it
yeah,
out?
because of the relationship between. Because you could just as easily have it as
And I'm talking about like all of them together,
No,
you know?
No. Left,
Okay.
right, now.
Yeah.
Not at all. No. You could switch them around, whatever. It's this column versus that column means nothing.
Yeah, got it.
It's
Okay.
that and that and that and
And
that.
also, like, the sidekick can be the sidekick to the antagonist.
Right. It's because
Yeah.
it's the faithful. They represent faith and support, not to particularly anything. Each of these are approaches to resolving a problem. Now, this is 1/4 of the elements that an archetype represents. There are actually 6 more elements on each one of these, so that there are a total of 64 elements. Or if you look at any one of these classes, all of the little ones in here collectively are the pieces that make up your overall story characters. And you can, so an archetypal protagonist will pursue through proaction. Those are completely compatible. It's sort of like one is a motivation, the next one's a methodology to affect actuality. So to make real change, have real effect. That's sort of like one little tower. So the protagonist pursues through proaction. They prevent or avoid through reaction. And it goes all. But the nice thing is what happens is that that's just the natural default place we think of things if you're thinking of them in cartoony type of characters. Because it's like, literally for characters, it's like primary colors. So I'm going to have a protagonist, and I'm going to have an antagonist, and a sidekick. By doing that, it's really easy for you to draw out all the things that are necessary for an entire character set and have to do very little storytelling because your audience knows exactly what you mean. And you don't have to explain anything. All you have to do is then explain the differences where you want to make a little bit of variation. The only time you want to do that is when you really don't want to be spending any time on developing character. When you want to be developing theme or developing plot or developing genre and you really couldn't care less about character, especially the objective characters, then that's why you would have that. But
or you say you've got half an hour,
right, you have a very little amount of time, a short film.
Yeah.
You don't have time to explore that. You may not even have time to explore all those characters. So the other thing is that you can do is you think of Wizard of Oz. Dorothy's the protagonist. The antagonist is the witch. The sidekick, Toto. Skeptic is Cowardly Lion. reason, if I only had a brain. You've got scarecrow, emotion, if I only had a heart. I mean, you got songs that basically are exactly what these are. The guardian is Glinda.
Oh,
no, I mean,
Yeah.
help and conscience. I mean, well, this is what you need to do, or you should go to this, right? And then you've got, the Wizard of Oz, antagonist. Oh, go see the wizard. He'll solve all your problems. No, he's not going to solve all your problems. That's leading you astray. It's it's not going to get you to where you need to go, right? But really, the thing is, what happened in that, it's when you think of it in the broad sense, that feels and seems to be completely right, but is not. Because what they did is, if you look at reason, is logic and control. Well, the Scarecrow is not controlled. He's all over the place. He's uncontrolled. And the Tin Man is not uncontrolled. He's controlled. He's feeling and controlled. In fact, when he feels, he's so controlled he's completely solid and stuck. Control being as, uncontrolled is like frenzy at the extreme. Control is like frozen at the extreme. So another word for uncontrolled is free. Well, physically, you see this Scarecrow as being very physically free, and the Tin Man is being very frozen, but he is definitely feeling. So you can start to tweak them, and it starts to make them a little more interesting. And truly, what's happening with the wizard and the witch, which is a little weird, which is why the screen time is so odd with the two of them, is that the antagonist, the witch, is actually both prevent or avoid and hinder. So, when she's throwing little fireballs at them, that's not trying to stop them. She's just making it a little more difficult. Or writing, "Surrender, Dorothy," right? She's just not stopping them. She's just making it a little more difficult for them. Because she has a very physical presence in the story, but who doesn't? The wizard. I mean, you only hear about him a lot, and you see the fire but you don't really see him much except right toward the end. That's because he's reconsider. Are you sure you want to go see the wizard? You can't get in this door, and you can't get by the guard, and you can't go see him, and come back and go. All these things, reconsider, and then the temptation that here's the easy way out. If you do this, I'll give you a diploma. Now you're smart, and it's like that's not the right answer. So he actually is more all the internal elements much more than the physical ones, and she's more the physical. The witch is more the physical. Anyway, it gets much more complex than most times, like the movie we saw today. You can kind of sort of peg a sort of a guardian and a sort of an antagonist and a sort of a protagonist, but when you really start looking at it beyond just sort of the vague label, it falls apart very quickly. But what happens is you go, oh, they represent a pose. This is pursue, and this one is chaos, and this one's order, and this one, so you suddenly have all these things that you could go boom, 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 and assign them. And it doesn't matter meaning-wise to whom they're assigned, just as long as they appear. Because each one is an approach to how to resolve an inequity, how to solve a problem. And one of them is going to be the right one. And everyone else is going to be the wrong one. And one of them is going to actually be the source of the conflict. So that's why we don't really address it. And these characters can be combined in a player, like just think of an actor or container that also has the main character. So you can have your main character be the protagonist, or a main character could be the antagonist, or the sidekick, or the skeptic, or the contagonist, or you can have the main character, any character in the big picture. Most people think that the main character has to be the protagonist. And that's what the hero is. Because the hero is the one leading the charge in the big picture, but also has the personal story. And that is one very, very narrow way of defining what that particular combination is. And more often than not, the antagonist is not the influence character. The only time you have the character, as a generality, the only time you have an influence character be the antagonist is in a horror story, where you have basically everybody getting killed off, and you need to have the two characters that are still the main and influence character available to the end, which are usually going to be your protagonist and antagonist. But that's just a logistical problem, because you can have a player who represents reason get knocked off. Some other player can come in and just pick up the job. Call it a handoff. And you can have a group represent, you know, a character, as long as they're all behaving the same way collectively. So you have a lot of flexibility. It's all storytelling. That's not tied to the meaning in the story. It's part of the function of the story, but the choices that you make are really just storytelling choices, which is why we don't explore them here, because other than just being an exercise in can you name that element and who does it go, what player does it go with, and there's really no value in it, because you could just as easily fit in another character. Okay, cool. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You probably sort of bit off a little more than you thought you were going to on a Tuesday night.
Oh, you're very welcome.
When you do the other, are you also going into the software aspect of it?
Yeah.
Fix it that way?
Yeah.
They do it with people's work.
Right.
Yeah.
Works in progress. And the kind of the goal, which what we may reach or not, is to come up with a story form. At least for that, at least based on the discussion. We get people first. We get everybody sort of gut response to the material.
Okay.
Then we start turning to analysis, and we start breaking down what, based on everybody's responses. It's like, well, you know, we don't know who your impact character is. We need to decide that. We need to sort of coalesce, you know, all these ideas into this framework. When you start breaking it down in this framework, then you actually start unraveling where the real problems are, and which is, you know, you find out how people respond, but it's when you really start breaking it down that you really find the source of the issues, and, you know, your story, what's missing, or what doesn't go together, you know. So yeah, and so we try to get a story form, and depending on how late we're going, you know, we may spend time to discuss, you know, the ramifications of the story form, what all of it means, but even just the process of getting there is very helpful and helps you get clarity on what the story is supposed to be about. So drop me an email if you want to join us. Thanks. And let me know if you want to come next week. Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, man.
Thanks so much.
So, John, did you actually join on the? I can't remember who joined and who didn't.
Yeah, I put up a lot of articles today.
Oh, okay.
Did you upload some?
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Quite a few. And actually a lot of chronology, like going back to June of 14.
Yeah, that's kind of when it
Yeah.
first started cropping
So
out.
if you want to follow it along.
Okay.
We don't get alerted to that.
Right. No, it just shows up.
I've got articles to upload too. I just had last time I used Dropbox, I didn't have any issues with Safari, but now I've got issues because it's gone beyond the ability of my Safari software. So I actually tried my Firefox, which is actually an older version than my Safari, but Firefox worked better. So I was able.
Well, Firefox is maintained. Safari on Snow Leopard is not maintained. That's the problem.
I know.
You can put the app on your computer. Dropbox app.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have the Dropbox app. So
Well, use that. You don't use Safari.
Or if it's
I just
not-
haven't used it in a while. But no, I have the.
If it's tied to another email address, maybe you should have to add that.
Yeah,
By the way,
just let me know.
my little symbol says DG because it's my wife. You know,
That's fine.
last time we used it, it was to download wedding photos, and so that's why it's my wife's name first.
Wow.
So, so DG is me.
And any thoughts so far?
I just identified I need to read through.
I found that there's a documentary being made about it. So I don't know if that's.
That would be different.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. So I don't know if that's going to be, you know,
helpful. Seems like they had. It seems like they had a chance to resolve the issue.
Oh,
Way back when.
well,
and
and
they opted not.
right, and you found the reason they were able to do it? Have you gone back that far? Okay, well, if you read the more current stuff, it'll tell you a bit of why, how it even happened.
Well, what's her name is very involved now. Brockovich. Yeah, she's doing.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not sure if you saw, she had a piece on, she was on Bill Maher very shortly.
Bill Maher. So on that.
And I thought that was a really...
There's a big article that they did about that and her Rolling Stone that was out this week.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if I put that one on the line.
Wasn't that Amy?
I like his stuff.
I don't know.
I have a feeling it's going to be some duplicate articles.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, again, gathering it's the first step, then going through and highlighting is the second step. If you want to, depending on, I think it really depends on what systems you're using. Are we all Mac? Okay. Then if you use Preview, I think you can set what color highlighter you use when you're, you don't need to do anything, you go down, you bring up the palette, and then you just set what color you are, and then just, select it. And set the marker color and the marker tool first, then all you do is select it and it highlights it, as opposed to selecting it and then hitting the highlighter. It's just sort of a little less effort. And so for us, what nights of the week are bad, generally speaking, other than Tuesdays for obvious reasons, except for the fourth Tuesday of the month?
From mid-March to early May, Thursday will be bad for me.
Okay, so Thursdays in general.
Thursdays are bad.
Okay, that's good.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
So are Mondays okay?
Wednesdays are a little.
What are the best?
I don't like Wednesday either.
Monday and Friday.
Monday or Friday? Well, I would say of the two, we got
Monday.
Monday.
Monday's bad for you?
Not ideal, but I'm
Well,
also
when
thinking,
are we right now? We're here?
Wednesday's not great either. Now that I
Well, we
think
could
about
also.
it.
How about also do it
Or we could do
Tuesday?
the fourth
that's not-
Tuesday.
The fourth Tuesday, is that open for everyone?
Honestly, that's
Well,
that's
let's plan that one
Yeah.
for the next one.
That's actually good for me because I always tell everybody Tuesday night's out.
Right.
Even though I haven't, and then when I don't have one, then I have time off.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
So we'll eat that up.
But yeah. So that's good.
This is an interesting group.
Oh,
I mean,
awesome.
having a lot of new faces.
Where did they come from? Are you offering something free?
Michael Katz had spoke to you, and he and his wife who are here, they came because of Sandy.
Dunbar came, or Molly's been at the writers group before, and so I guess they're writing something now. So Dunbar just came for the first time last week.
Oh, okay.
Dan just popped in.
Yeah.
She's so familiar.
Screenwriters Network.
Oh yeah, Dan Marlis. Yeah. I knew him because of the script.
I don't read
that. But he's you actually emailed me. You saw something that he posted on his site.
Remember the
that was a little
night?
inaccurate, and you just pointed out to me, and I got in contact with him.
And remember that night we had like standing room only? It's because the Scriptwriters Network had posted something about our meeting. It's like, and they're all newbies. Yeah.
Right.
I don't remember what the movie was, but it was.
No, it was story weaving.
Yeah. Oh, it was story weaving. That's right.
Or story embroidery.
Yeah,
Story
that was it.
Scared everybody.
Yeah, that's like, oh, pick the hardest night. Okay.
Yeah.
Put everybody on the spot. And it's like, ah. Yeah. And what do we have next? Song of the Sea. Leviathan.
Leviathan.
Okay. So it's the one I said is going to make you happy.
Why?
It's Russian.
Ooh, it's depressing.
Well, from what I understand, it's depressing and also a little funny.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it either. I remember when they were showing clips of it for the Academy. Well, isn't it about two brothers?
I only saw the regular trailer,
Like two,
Lemley, and it didn't look at all funny.
but it's like, isn't it about two sort of not warring brothers, but brothers who just don't?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's about a landowner and an oligarch who's coming in to steal the land.
Oh, laugh a minute.
Yeah. Two brothers could be Ram. You guys don't know Ram? Come on, it's hilarious. Two brothers.
Thanks for this recommendation. That was a really good
It's
film,
great, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a great movie.
but it had a happy ending, and you liked it.
I loved it. Yeah.
Wow, getting soft in your old age.
It's so funny. I thought this was about like summer school or something. Like I don't know where I picked that up, but this was not the movie I thought I was sitting down for. And all of a sudden, I was like,
I had no idea.
oh,
I didn't know what it was
Let
either.
me ask, since this is 2 hours and 20 minutes, are you still going to start at 5 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay. And the meeting will just start at 7:20.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, that's what Jim said.
Yeah, exactly.
He'll be here ready to get ready.
Yeah. Oh, did we stop it? I didn't stop it.
Oh no!
Is it still going? I knew there was something
All
I
that.
forgot to do.
All that cussing and all those racist comments we made.
Let's see.
No, we'll never win